Welcome to today's Youth Enquiry Service Podcast. I'm Emily. Today we are focusing on the topic of smoking and vaping. We are joined by Kirkpatrick, who is a tobacco control specialist with the NHS
Dumfries and Galloway.
Welcome on, Rebecca. We are happy to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
To get us started with an icebreaker question, if you can be any food, what food would you be and why?
I would be pizza, because then I could be whatever different topping I wanted to be on that day. What about you? What would you be?
I would be pasta, because whatever sauce you put on it, you can always change from sweet and stuff like that.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Because you can always change from sweet to like cheesy, like to show how you feel.
Yeah. Good.
And can you tell us about a tobacco control specialist and more about your role?
Yeah, so my job sits in the Quit Your Way team. So we work with the NHS, in the NHS to support people who want to stop smoking and vaping. So we've got advisors that work across the region, mainly with adults who want to stop smoking. But my job's a bit different because it's working mainly with young people. So I go into schools, come to youth groups, so primary and secondary schools, delivering messages about smoking and vaping. And if anybody wanted some support to stop, it would be myself who would offer that one-to-one support. So rather than like a nurse or a doctor who is treating somebody who's unwell, my job is to try and prevent people from becoming unwell by doing a bit of early intervention work.
That's a good idea. When would a young person engage with a tobacco control specialist?
So somebody might see me when I'm in schools. So I do a lot of work this year with primary schools, so talking to primary 5 to 7s. So we do loads of interactive sessions, so they might come across me then. They might see me at assemblies in secondary schools, or we go along and do talks for like Do the Right Thing. So that's a programme that's aimed at third years across Dumfries and Galloway. Or people might be referred to us, so if they decided that they wanted to stop smoking or vaping, they might have asked their school nurse or a teacher, or might just get in touch with us if they've maybe seen me in a school. So that's how they would see me.
Why do you think that vaping has become so popular
among young people? So I think that kind of post-pandemic, that's when we really noticed that there was a lot of young people who were going back to school and were vaping. So I think personally that a lot of it has come from exposure to social media. They have seen a lot of people doing it. When I ask that question, when I go into schools to young people and ask them why do they do it? Why do young people vape? Most of the time, but 95% of the time, they'll tell me that it's to fit in, or it's peer pressure, or it's to look cool. So I think that's a huge part of it. I also think that the manipulation that's been caused by the tobacco companies, they are targeting young people now with the bright colours, with the different flavours. Somebody was telling me the other week that you can get a vape now that's got a game on the side of it, and it's like got a little pet that you have to try and keep alive, like from vaping. So these tactics are all set there to try and get young people addicted to nicotine. So I think there's a lot going on, and I think young people who are maybe struggling a bit with school or with their emotions, anything that's kind of anxiety related, once they've started vaping, they feel like that's the only thing that'll kind of keep them from feeling too anxious, or that's their safety net, is having that vape. So I think there's a lot to it with the vaping, but definitely peer pressure is a huge part.
Like similar to game tactics, like free game tactics where they use bright colours and like
absolutely,
like free ads, so you have to pay, so they influence you to buy.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you just have to look at the advertising that you see in shops now for vapes. Like tobacco products are all hidden away, whereas you go into a shop now and there's like bright electronic like screens that have got the vapes on it. So they're really attractive to a young person, and I think it's gone so far away from what they were initially made for, which was to help people who were smoking to stop smoking cigarettes and tobacco products. Now it's a whole different market of people who are using vapes. We're seeing young people who have never smoked using vapes. So it's very different from how it started.
We're seeing lots of people on social media provide advice and support on smoking and vaping.
Yeah.
What would you do to navigate this?
Okay, so I think there's a lot of good advice out there on social media, but I think we have to be really cautious about where it's coming from. So, like I just said, the vapes started because as an electronic cigarette for people who wanted to stop smoking. Now, if you are to research different ways of stopping using vapes, you're quite often directed to like another nicotine product. So my concern with that would be just be careful about what the source is. So if you're looking on social media for support to stop, it's looking at who's providing that support. So trying to stay with like NHS sources, or Ash Scotland is a great resource as well. Loads of helpful tips on there that are reliable and have got evidence behind them, rather than some of the other ones that we see that maybe aren't so evidence based.
Or you can see those, I think they're like little tins, like they're similar to smoking, that they'll give you the same feeling without any nicotine.
Okay, yeah. So
You'll see those and all.
Yeah. So there are different things. A lot of these products we don't know enough about. So anything that is trying to replace nicotine, we would probably be erring on the side of caution with, because where's that come from? Who's producing that? So a lot of these other products are still made by the tobacco companies that they know their products can really hurt people. So it's just about managing the risks about what people are using instead. But I know some young people that have got like a hollow metal tube almost that they use.
A whistle thing.
Yeah. And they find that quite helpful. And it is just that, like having like a safety net, like it's still something in their hand that they can put to their mouth, so that with their friends, they don't feel so left out because they're still using something, but it's just air that they're blowing in and out. It's not any chemicals or any nicotine, which is good.
What would be your top tips for young people who are thinking to quit smoking and vaping?
Okay. I think acknowledging the fact that they want to stop, so congratulating themselves, because that's a huge first step for a young person to want to stop, to admit that they are addicted to something. So we can't forget that nicotine is a drug, and it's something that is addictive. So for somebody to admit that they want to stop, that's a huge first step. The best thing they could do would be to ask for support. So if they didn't feel comfortable asking us for support, asking like a trusted adult that they have, or it might be a friend, because we know that if somebody gets professional support and maybe has nicotine replacement therapy that we're able to prescribe them, that's far more likely for them to be successful at quitting than if they're to try it on their own. So a lot of young people will say that they've tried like 3 or 4 times to stop smoking or vaping with me. And when I ask them how they've done it, who they had to support, they're like, oh, I just did it myself, and I just quit it all and just decided to stop. But then after a few days, they've gone back to it. So I think if somebody wants to stop, the best thing they can do is to try and get in touch with us if they can, because then we can talk them through a plan. But if they really want to do it on their own, it's setting a quit date. So they decide on the day that they're going to have their last cigarette, and then that is the day, or a vape, and that's the last day that they have it. And then they tell themselves, that's like a little mantra that we have, it's like, not one puff. So we say, on your quit date, you have no more cigarettes, you have no more vape, whatever one it is that you're quitting, so that they know that from that day they are a non-smoker or they are a non-vapor. And trying to think about the challenges that they might face. So if it's coming up to exam time, what are they going to replace that vape with instead? Because they're still going to need something, because they have got that addiction. So talking is the best thing, a bit like for everything, isn't it?
Does if you wheeled yourself off it, does that harm you more, or does that harm you less in your addiction? If
you were to wean yourself off?
Yeah.
No, so that's great. So some people who maybe don't want to go on to like a nicotine replacement, so if they don't want to have the patches or like the nicotine gum that we can prescribe, they might decide to gradually reduce how much they're doing it. So what I would say to someone that's doing that is have somebody that you're accountable to. So have someone that you're telling that you're doing that, or keep a diary of it, because quite often what we can find is that the person might kid themselves and say that they have only had 3, but they might have forgotten about the one that they had on their way home from school or just before they went to bed. But if they tell somebody that they're weaning themselves off, they've got someone that they have to keep reminding them to do it. So yeah, certainly any reduction is better than having what they were having before, as long as we've got this end goal of being fully quit.
Yeah, because I saw some people do that method.
Yeah, and that's quite common, especially with the vaping. So with vaping, we might see people who might restrict themselves to the size of vape that they have, or make a vape last for 2 or 3 days, whereas they might have only had it for like a day before that. Or reducing the strength of nicotine, because then if they're not having as strong a nicotine vape, then that's less nicotine that they're having into their body. So that's another good way of them doing it.
What coping methods would you recommend to young people instead of smoking and vaping?
So quite often people like the distraction that they have with vaping. So when a person is using a vape or a cigarette, they might go outside to do it, or they take themselves away from that stressful situation. So that's something that they can still do. They can still remove themselves from that place and go outside and get some fresh air, go for a walk. When a person's craving nicotine, that feeling tends to last for about 5 minutes. So if you can distract yourself for 5 minutes, whether it's playing a video game, going for a walk, talking to somebody, phoning a friend, like doing some drawing, like whatever the person enjoys. And that's a really big part of my role, is that when I meet with someone, it's not just about telling them, like, this is when you're stopping, this is how you're going to do it. I don't have the answers. It's about finding out what works for them, because what works for you wouldn't necessarily work for your friend or work for your neighbour. It's about finding out, okay, so you enjoy doing this, but you've maybe not done it for a while, or maybe you couldn't afford to do it because you were vaping, but you could do it now. And it's about using things that are relatable to you. So everyone's different, but usually it's like going for a walk or listening to music, watching something that they enjoy, anything that's a distraction. And breathing techniques are really helpful as well, especially for people who are using it as a way to deal with stress. We can tell them like different breathing techniques that they can use just to try and kind of ground them a little bit again. So that can be helpful.
Thanks for talking with us. I really enjoyed talking to you today. Before we finish up, we want to know what you love most about your job.
I think what I love most is that there's no 2 days that are the same. So every day I'm either in a primary school, and it could be somewhere really rural, or I can be talking to like high school kids. So when I'm in primary schools, I get so many different questions or stories from the younger kids telling me about like their granny that smokes or their brother that vapes, and they tell me all these things, and they're so against it. You know, at that point you see them that they don't ever want to smoke and they don't ever want to vape. And then you go to the secondary schools and it's different conversations. And more recently, I've been having really good conversations with some kids who are currently smoking and vaping. And their honesty that they tell me is like amazing. It's just great to hear what is coming from them. And it's the different light bulb moments that they have. So it's not always my job to be telling them to stop. With this group, it's been about like just chatting to them about why they do it, where they get it from, what they enjoy from it, and maybe what worries them. And at different points in our conversation, there's like that light bulb moment that they go, oh, I don't really want to be doing this anymore. And they might not stop, and that's okay. But it started that conversation that maybe they do want to think about stopping, but it's also opened up an opportunity that they know who I am and they know what our service is. So yeah, I think it's just the fact that every day is different with the job, and that's what I love the most.
You always need that difference in everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's the end of today's podcast. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms for next week's episode. Bye.
Follow us to keep up with more podcasts.